Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Addicted to Profits editor David Skarica comments on how recent deadly events could affect your portfolio. American Manganese CEO Larry Reaugh on the opportunities connected to the electric car battery business. Dollar vigilante Jeff Berwick is concerned how over-government is robbing your wealth. We talk to David Skarica right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Sitting in for Phil Mackesy, here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is David Skarica, editor of AddictedToProfits.net. Welcome to This Week in Money.
Thanks for having me.
David, the first question I have is, have we seen any impact on the markets from the shoot down of that plane in the Ukraine and also Israel's invasion of Gaza? Major factors this week?
Well, I think the Israel thing, it's just, that happens too often where I don't really think that has a big impact. No, I think that ISIS and what's going on in Iraq and Syria are actually going to end up being a really, really big impact. Because I think actually the markets have not priced in any negative scenario there at all. And I actually think that's going to be much more negative than what they're looking at. See, in the Middle East, before we get into Ukraine, I think they're kind of going through, and I tend to not be very extremist in my political views or, in my kind of outlook in the world. I'm not one of these doom and gloomers, but what I think is really going on in the Middle East is they're kind of having their 1913, 1914 moment where, 100 years later, where you have all these oligarchs, way back then and back in Europe. And in Middle East, there's more, we have dictatorships, and those are starting to be toppled, whether if they're religious or secular or whatever. And when you have that happen, it's not going to exactly be all fine and dandy. And there's only really a couple Canadian or American independences. Where even in the U.S., when you had a war, you had a pretty smooth transition after the war into a republic. And Canada had a smooth transition into an independent democracy. So I don't think that's going to happen there. I think like a lot of civil war and a lot of bloodshed and a lot of, just like a lot of, violence. And I think actually the market is not discounting that at all. I think that's something the market is, it's just, the market in the United States and to a lesser extent Europe and Canada are really too focused on these central banks and that they're going to keep rates low forever and profit margins can stay high forever and there's no place to put your money but stocks. And I really think the market is not focused on geopolitics at all right now. And in terms of the Ukraine shoot down, the Ukrainian situation has never worried me as much is because I think that regardless of what you read in the press about him in the West, I think actually Putin has actually shown, regardless of what just happened here recently, a lot of restraint. Because, he could easily just go into Ukraine and grab it like he did Crimea, because the Ukrainian defense and military is really no match for Russia's. And like from a personal standpoint, I'm not as negative on him because if you had NATO and all your enemies in your back door, you would want to protect yourself. Like if Russia and China had, were snooping around in Mexico, the United States would be doing the exact same thing. So, and if you go look what happened in the 90s, NATO and the West really actually screwed over Russia. So I totally kind of understand where he's coming from on that. So, so I don't really think that's going to escalate because, we've had sanctions. If you have more sanctions because of the shoot down, then you're probably, you're probably going to see actually him refrain even more from doing anything. So I'm not as worried as the Ukraine thing escalating as some, but the Middle Eastern, you're talking about Israel and Gaza. Yeah, that's part of it, but I really think the problems are going to lie with ISIS, which is a very well organized group and now very well funded and very tactical. Like they're just slowly over what they can and they're not overreaching their bounds. And then when they do grab an oil field in Iraq, when they feel that they can, I think that's when you're going to see a lot of problems. So that's my geopolitical fear, is actually more in the Middle East and more in ISIS, and what's happening there.
Does it help? Does it help
you
the
know,
markets here that the U.S. is nearly oil independent now?
Well, first of all, they're not really. That's kind of a spin, but they're not. They actually still consume almost twice as much oil as they actually produce. So that's not the truth. Like it's actually very, very, you know, like they produce about 8 to 9 billion barrels a day, and they consume 19. So I wouldn't call that independent. Yeah, that they're less reliant definitely helps. And of course, they can get a lot from Canada and Mexico and places that are essentially allies. So yeah, that definitely, it acts as an insular buffer. And then, you know, you are seeing also, you're going to see continue, you know, with guys like Musk, from Tesla, who also, you know, runs a solar company, really aggressively, expanding solar capacity and making it cheaper. So you're going to see more, alternative energies. And I think that actually is one reason you may get this 1913 moment in the Middle East as well, because if we are now less dependent on them and they have less sway in the world, and, you know, oil prices maybe they could spike short term, but if oil prices aren't really subsidizing these rogue states there, that is really, really gonna, you know, hurt them. You know, that could really lead to they're gonna need more instability over there. But I definitely think, yeah, the U.S. producing more oil, you know, Germany is gonna be something like 70% solar by 2025. So, like, you look at all of these factors and the West becoming less dependent on Middle Eastern oil, that, you know, perversely also influences what's going on in the Middle East, because it's going to make them have less influence in the world and more susceptible to volatility in their politics and in their society. So, you know, but that definitely plays a factor that, yeah, the U.S. has seen, this go on. But see, and just the last thing on the kind of the fracking boom, there's two major issues I have with it. And the first is that this was the easy stuff that they found. Remember, U.S. oil production got halved and fell for something like 37 straight years from, like, you know, 1970 to 2007. And of course, if you adjust that for population and oil usage, you know, it fell like 70% or 80%. So, you know, on a per person basis. And it's basically gone up about 70 to 80% from those lows, from roughly 5 billion a day to 8 billion, or 5 million a day to 8 million a day. So that's the easy stuff. And we know that from the oil sands in Alberta, that, you know, you look at Suncor and Canadian oil sands, all these stocks were fabulous in the 90s and 2000s. And since the financial crisis, they actually really kind of petered out. And one reason is because the easy stuff was gone. You know, the easy stuff that you find early on is gone, and yeah, then the stuff becomes higher cost of production. And then, of course, one of the major problems is in the South in the U.S. Like, there's never going to be any fracking in the short term in California because they have a gigantic drought going on. So, and fracking takes up a huge amount of water. And actually, that's my second issue with it, is that you have a technology that, to me, the most important commodity in the world is not oil, it's not natural gas, it's not ethanol, it's water. And you have technology where you're using that to produce oil. So I don't know how sustainable that is longer term. And one thing I can tell you I've discovered about the United States as I've gotten older is they plan zero out down there. So they're just kind of like doing this on a whim. So, you know, I don't know if you have to be like the Soviet Union and have a 5-year economic plan, but I think you need some kind of plan for sustainable development. And they don't do that in the States. They just kind of, you know, think there is universal prosperity and just build everything up, and then it kind of implodes in their face. So that's why I don't know how sustainable it really is. I definitely think the fracking boom is for real, especially in places like North Dakota, you know, where there's very small populations, and, you know, you really don't have to worry about the water issue. But overall, we just have to see how sustainable and how big it is and how much increase there's going to be after this kind of easy kind of oil has been found.
Yeah, North Dakota, I saw one had a pizza delivery man offered something like $57,000 a year.
Yeah, well, see, that's the whole thing about this whole, and I think it's like that anywhere almost with these, decline in the economy, is that if you're willing, like it was like the guy's willing to go to Fort McMurray in Canada. Like, if you're willing to go and live in North Dakota, and let's face it, most people would rather live in Los Angeles or Miami, right? But if you're willing to go up there and live up there, yeah, you can make a good living. And, actually, when I was reading about the oil boom in these little towns in North Dakota, it just reminded me actually exactly of like Calgary. Like, when it was in its early stages that, guys are making $100,000 a year and there's a real lack of housing and all that sort of thing. So I definitely think that boom is for real. But like I said, the easy part of it is over, and let's just see where it kind of goes from here going forward. So,
did you see any bumps in the market that people might attribute to the recent current events, the violence going on?
I personally just think we're in a gigantic bubble. See, here's what's happened. We're in a complacency bubble. In late 90s, we were like the classic boom-bust bubble. In the 90s, were like the 20s, and we had a great economy, and it was influenced by, easy money like it is now. It was influenced by new technologies like all bubbles are, and everyone felt great and thought the party was going to run forever. And then we reinflated the housing bubble after that bust. And people thought they could live off their homes and take out third and fourth mortgages and refinance and whatever. So this bubble is more like a complacency bubble, that when the Federal Reserve cut rates to zero, essentially all these Western governments are broke due to unfunded liabilities, huge debts, so they can't have rates go up anymore. This is a different era in that regard, that rates aren't going to normalize in the short term to 7 or 8%. You saw what happened 2 years ago when that happened in Spain and Italy. Those governments are almost going to go like defunct when that happens. So they got to keep rates as low as long as possible. And by doing that, they make borrowing costs cheap for large companies. They can borrow and buy back their stock, and everyone just thinks that the market can go up forever. So I think what the sell-off on Thursday just showed, that because you have this complacency bubble and you think that the Federal Reserve can keep inflating the market forever, then when you get a little bump in the road like that, you can sell off. Now, of course, it lasted a day, and I don't know when, the real decline is going to come. But see, I don't really look for events. Like, there was really no event. I know 9/11 happened, but there was really no event when the tech bubble just burst. And this stuff just got overvalued. And then, even look at 1987. There was really no geopolitical event that drove it lower. It just goes parabolic, and it gets overextended, and too many people are on one side of the trade. And then when it reverses, they all go to the other side, and they all do it at once. And it's like an elephant going through a pinhole.
Do humans have a need then to have things explained by something they can see? Oh, the market took a dump because of this plane crash or this terrorist incident. Do we always want to connect A to B somehow?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. People like it because that makes it simplistic. Gold went up because, this plane crashed, and that makes it simplistic for them to do. But in terms of the actual market action, when you have a period like right now, when you have and this is one of the reasons it's so bearish right now, when you have a 3-year period where the market has big gains, so it's up like, say, doubles in those 3 years, and you do not even have a 10% correction. Because remember, a 10% correction happens once every year on average. And a 20% bear market happens once every 3 years on average. But you have 3 years without even 10% correction. And going back the last 2 years, you haven't even really had like an 7 or 8% correction. When you get that kind of, moves in the market, you look at 85 to 87, you look at 1935 to 1937, 26, 27 to 29, 2005 to 2007, almost every major bear market, this is how the market acts right beforehand. And that's what really worries me. Now, the argument right now, all the bulls have is that the Fed is essentially going to be on the market side. And I think it's just too easy to think that they're going to do the taper in October, start raising rates sometime early to mid next year, and then the market's going to tank. I think everyone's waiting for that. My argument all along has been one of these tapers is just going to, that's when the liquidity stops. And actually, I've said, I think it's going to be actually, and this may seem very short notice, but the one in July, which is the one that's going to be in about 12 days, or the one in September. in mid-September, because that's when they go to 25 and then 15. And my argument is the money printing is essentially been subsidizing the deficit in the States. So when they started, the deficit was about 80 billion a month. Well, they were printing 85 billion, and now deficit's dropped a bit. It's going to be about 550, 560 billion this year. Well, that's 45 a month. They're still printing 35 a month. But I think when they get to 25 and 15 a month, then this is not stimulative anymore. And that's what can really maybe suck the liquidity in the market. And by the way, all you got to do is look at it. This is what really makes me laugh at the bulls, that, when they talk about 3D printing or biotech or social media internet and these great new technologies, if you just look at when the Fed started printing 85 a month, all those sectors started going straight up. And so to me, that's just no coincidence. It just inflated a bubble. And if you look at a lot of the big long-term indicators, like the CAPE, the 10-year trailing PDE, market cap, or the stock market cap, to GDP percentage, all these long-term indicators, which may not work tomorrow or next week or next month, but really work over, say, a 3 to 5 year period. These are all at extreme levels, not seen since the 2000 and 2007 top.
David, is there a website people can go to find out more about your philosophy and how not to get burned by the rate of the expected downturn in the markets?
Yeah, go to addictedtoprofits.net, and actually this over the next week, I'm going to do 2 videos. And actually, one of the videos is talking just about what I was just talking about. I'm actually going to show, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I am going to show why there is a chance we may get kind of a crash scenario because of the way the market is trading.
Coming up, Larry Reaugh next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
My guest is Larry Reaugh, President and CEO of American Manganese. He's been a long-time client of This Week in Money, and thank you very much for supporting us. Today on the show, we're going to talk about electric vehicles, the batteries needed to run them, and the commodities used to build those batteries. Larry, welcome to This Week in Money.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Jim.
Lithium. That's the first thing I want to ask about, because I've been told if everybody goes electric, there isn't enough lithium to go around.
Well, in a sense, but I think that probably for the next 10 years there certainly is, because lithium's only 4% of the makeup of the entire battery.
Right, so you don't need a whole lot to make a big battery. No,
you don't. For example, if it's a cobalt battery, then 60% of it's cobalt and 4% of it's lithium. If it's a manganese battery, then 60% of it's manganese and 4% lithium. So you can see how lithium's a necessary ingredient. That's the one that is always on the package. And, of course, it gets a lot of attention, but there is a lot of lithium production, and certainly there's enough coming on production probably to handle any shortfall.
Where does lithium mostly come from?
Well, there's big producers in the U.S. and there's also South America. I think there's some production out of Australia. I think it's not a huge amount a year. The price is great. I can't remember what the price was, so don't ask me that. But there's a lot of companies exploring it. There's a lot of lithium below ground that could be exploited, and I think with this Tesla factory that will, basically start everybody churning up to go into future production.
Now, Tesla has announced that they're going to build a $5 billion factory in California, I believe, to build these Tesla cars. Right now, they're, for most people, unaffordable. Do you think they will become more affordable when this plant opens?
Okay, the $5 billion gigafactory is actually a lithium-ion battery factory. They've already got their car manufacturing in California, and the location for the gigafactory is going to either be Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, or Texas. and that hasn't been announced yet. And but that's an interesting scenario. What Elon Musk has done. He's laid down a real challenge to the other electric vehicle companies, and that challenge is that he's going to build a factory that he's going to utilize fully that will produce more batteries in 2020 than all the car companies put together produced in 2013. So that's an ambitious stroke. Now, he's also saying that he may have 2 locations coming up. If anybody's doubtful whether that will go ahead, well, he's already raised over $2 billion for that within a week of announcing the factory. He's looking for a partner, probably a battery company, and I don't think the rest of the money will be that hard to find. His stock is performing very well.
I know one of the reasons they said Tesla was being held back was their lack of production and that they couldn't meet the demand for orders, but it looks like they're doing their very best to make sure that isn't a problem.
Well, that's twofold, to stop the bottleneck and also to bring the costs down by 30%. Roughly, the battery market is a very secretive and non-transparent market. And so trying to get a price on everything is quite difficult. But I think you're looking at, for a battery in the Tesla, you're looking at probably in the neighborhood of $15,000. So that's a big ticket number on the total price. So he's looking at bringing that back to, close to $10,000. So, that's a big start.
What about other manufacturers of electric cars? Would they be able to tap into that supply of batteries?
The other manufacturers certainly could. He will sell batteries, and I think he's already doing some of that work with Mercedes. But that contract's coming to an end. But Elon is a very dynamic person who has a lot of foresight, and he's making moves in the market that's going to revolutionize the electric vehicle. And right now he says, "Look, I'm going to take my patents and I'm going to open them up to everybody. This is all of the Tesla patents." And I'm going to take our charging stations, and I would like to have a universal charging station where we all participate in each other's charging stations, or, we jointly put them in. Now, that's a huge savings. I think his charging stations, there's one just went into Squamish, are close to $300,000 by the time you put the solar energy into it and you put the charging station in. That's a lot of money.
$300,000, but it will be. I'm wondering, how do you charge your car in the wintertime, though, if it's snowing?
Well, they have battery storage, and so there'll be storage batteries there, and I imagine that in some climates they would be back up off the grid.
With all these moves in to open the patents to everybody who wants to use them and making the batteries available, what do you think this is going to do to the overall electric car market?
It's gonna cause it to explode. And even right now, there's a couple of companies that have just recently said they're going to share patents and share technology, not patents so much, but technology on their batteries. And that is, it just slips my mind here at the moment. But
well, I know Nissan's just announced a new all-electric car.
Yeah, well, Nissan builds the Nissan Leaf, and Toyota builds a Nissan Leaf, and that uses a manganese battery. Currently, Tesla uses a cobalt battery, but the one I'm thinking of is Fisker, who uses an iron phosphate battery, but they bought A123, and they were pretty vocal about challenging Tesla, or challenging Elon to take first place in the U.S. in car sales and production. So this is the sort of thing that's resulting. General Motors has already moved all of their manufacturing to their manufacturing plant, and they use a lithium manganese battery. They're moving their manufacturing into the U.S. totally and not buying out of Korea anymore. They're spending $450 million on the Chevy Volt and their battery facilities. So, and this has all happened just after the Gigafactory announcement.
Well, usually when there's new technology, there's always some announcement where someone is going to grab it and be behind it 100%. And when that major player does it, then everybody else is glad to jump on the bandwagon, because then they know there will be auxiliary support for the other things that you need, like charging stations that can recharge your car in just a few minutes instead of having to take overnight.
Well, that's true. And just to back up a moment, I was telling you about other companies that were going to share battery technology. That was BMW and Samsung. So you're starting to see a movement here of collaboration. And it would be like, we've pretty much standardized the gas motor and everything. You can buy gas at any gas station, right? Well, why shouldn't you be able to go charge your car at any charging station across the country?
Or maybe have some kind of a universal charger remote thing like you have for your cell phone, where you can plug in 3 or 4 different kinds of cell phones.
Well, that's kind of what the charging station would look like. Probably standardizing their plug-in would be a big boost to everybody. And Tesla's got a lot of stations across the United States now, charging stations, and they have this latest move to open up the stations to other cars. I think in a couple of years, it's predicted they'll have the whole U.S. covered.
Do the power companies have enough capacity to start charging up all these electric cars if they become super popular?
Well, this is always the question from the naysayers, and Tesla's saying no, we're going to use solar and wind, and for our charging stations. So they've got that question pretty. They'll have to have a backup, and of course that backup could be the grid, but it may not. It may reduce their grid demands to about 70%, right? Or to about 30% of the demand.
I'm wondering how soon before the government finds a way to start taxing electricity the way they tax gasoline for use on the road.
Well, the government's motto is if it works, tax it, right? And so I imagine they'll find a way to do it.
Yes, I was wondering the same thing when we had natural gas vehicles coming out. Why not just put a compressor on your home natural gas line and then fuel up your car that way? How would the government know the difference whether it was going into your house or your car?
They'd put a tax on, but they already have a tax on natural gas. And it would be kind of like, remember the agricultural diesel, which you dump a purple dye into it, and the price was half of a regular barrel of diesel? They managed to tax that, and of course you got the tax breaks by being in the agricultural industry like a farmer. But you couldn't. Nobody could sell you purple gas, so to speak, unless you had bona fides on being a farmer.
Does Tesla say where they're going to get their raw materials from for their lithium, cobalt, manganese, and graphite?
Well, they haven't come out and said where they're going to get them from, and but they have said that they're going to source them domestically, and domestically sourcing the materials such as we've gone through that lithium, cobalt, manganese, graphite would be a big boon for the U.S., be a big boon for Canada. And, we'd have more employment. We'd have domestic production. That's a challenge that he's put out there. And when you're selling cars, and especially in the U.S. where it's very patriotic to if you can, to use U.S. content, right? I think probably General Motors will have to start looking at U.S. content, along with everybody else that wants to sell electric vehicles in North America. So that's a great thing. I think he's going to put a lot of pressure on it. What he's done about it, the only thing he's mentioned at the time was that he had already met with 2 of the big producers of nickel in Canada. And so he goes, nickel? I thought he was cobalt, right? But, there is a safer battery that you lose some of the capacity and some of the strengths of just cobalt alone. That is it's the cobalt, nickel, manganese battery. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese battery. And so I can see where, he's looking at a supply of nickel probably in the north, or in the northeast anyway. That gives me an indication that there's going to be some chemistry changes in the battery, and I'm only guessing. So I caution anybody not to take this as gospel, but I would say there's going to be some changes. He's had a few fires. Cobalt, as you know, once it catches on fire, you can't put it out. And the cobalt has other things going for it that may not be as green as you'd like to have. And so, I think cobalt's necessarily a very big necessity in the battery, but I'm not sure whether he's going to go with strictly a cobalt battery at this juncture. He's got a chance to change his chemistry and the battery itself because he's building a factory. And once you start building that factory and everything is ordered and everything like that, you can't change your mind. So who knows what he's going to do?
Well, it's good to see that he's looking at North America and not Asia for this. It seems to me Asia gets all the good financial stuff right now anyway, so maybe it's time to bring a little home.
Well, that's a big, certainly is a big boon for him. I got to say that the guy's a game changer. He's changing the game, and it's going to be very difficult to keep abreast of him, or certainly to overtake him, or to keep up with him. And this is for the raw materials, like the graphite and cobalt and lithium and manganese and in some cases phosphate. It's going to be a big benefit for companies like we have on the TSX Venture Exchange, and certainly my company.
Well, that's a stock to keep an eye on. And I'm also wondering, too, about zinc, because the three biggest zinc mines in the world will be shutting down in a couple of years. And zinc is part of batteries as well, isn't it?
Well, there are certain aspects of zinc, but it's not in the lithium-ion field. It's not in the electric batteries. And zinc is more of a galvanizing material. And the stockpiles have been dropping dramatically. 2 years ago, they were at 1.2 billion pounds, and now they're about 640 million pounds. And a few zinc producers shutting down certainly could put a extreme demand on the supply that's out there today. So, zinc is probably one of the leaders out there for a commodity going forward.
Larry, is there a website people can go to find out more about American Manganese?
Yes, it's AmericanManganeseInc.com, and everything that we have is on that site. Our projects in Arizona, which is central to where this gigafactory is going to be. Whether it's going to be, it could be in Arizona, but my guess, if you want my guess on it, is going to be in Reno. And I think probably the two states right now. The reason he hasn't announced the location is because I think everybody's coming up with sweeteners all the time on taxation, all kinds of breaks on what he's going to require for infrastructure and all that in order to locate in their states. So he's in the cat spot seat.
Well, it's certainly an interesting place to be right now.
No, you bet.
After the break, the dollar vigilante, Jeff Berwick, on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
My guest is the dollar vigilante, Jeff Berwick. Welcome to This Week in Money.
Thank you, Jim.
The Malaysian airline downing in Ukraine. That's still at the top of the news. We don't know for sure what happened, but what kind of an impact is it having on the financial world right now?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I'm glad they finally found that missing Malaysian airline that was missing for a few months there. Apparently, the time is right to... I really don't know what happened, but I find it incredibly interesting and strange that Malaysian Airlines had a 777 Boeing missing for a few months, and right at about the time that Israel started attacking Gaza with tanks, all of a sudden in the Ukraine, all of a sudden it reappeared apparently.
Well, wouldn't they be able to check serial numbers on the wreckage to see if it matched the missing aircraft?
Well, my one thing is I just don't trust anything the government tells me or the media, and not you yourself, but the mainstream media. And no matter what they say happened, it's incredibly interesting because that plane was missing for a number of months. And that was the top of the news for a number of months. And all of a sudden, right at the right time, the right place, we have to start questioning these things.
Well, that's why I wondered what kind of a coincidence is it that it's a Malaysian Airlines 777. And 777s are relatively rare aircraft in the world where, you have tens of thousands of 737s scooting around the planet, but they don't even make 777s anymore.
Yeah, it's highly irregular and highly unusual. And just the fact that a few months ago they were looking for this plane for a number of months, and then the exact same plane right at a really good time, really, during trying to foment some sort of a civil war between Ukraine and Russia and Europe, just happened to show up. I've learned from a number of decades of questioning things to always question things.
The U.S. says it will help with any inquiries into this crash. Could you trust any information released by the National Safety Board?
Oh, of course not. Ask them about 9/11. Where was those 3 planes? There was no evidence of any plane at the Pentagram, and definitely no evidence of a plane at Shanksville. The coroner showed up, and he described it as a small garbage fire and said he left after 15 minutes because there was nothing to do there. You really have to start questioning a lot of these things. And I'm not saying that what happened in Ukraine wasn't totally real. I'm not saying that, but I just question everything I see now.
One of the cynics from the UBC Department of Medicine said that flight that went down in Ukraine was carrying a very large number of AIDS experts on their way to a conference in Asia. And, of course, the conspiracy theory is, well, isn't Putin against gays? And gays still predominantly are the people with HIV. Is there some kind of a conspiracy there?
Well, here's how deep it goes. AIDS doesn't really exist.
What is it then?
In my opinion, if you look back at it, I just question everything. Back in the 80s, a few gay people died in San Francisco, and the church and the government jumped all over it and said, this is a new disease against gay people. And then all of a sudden, no gay people died anymore. And then all of a sudden now it's in Africa. I think what's happening is in Africa, a lot of these governments, mafias, are saying that, if we say that anyone who died from anything died from AIDS, we get $1 billion from some charity or government organization. No, I really don't think even AIDS existed, really.
And of course, now we're being told that there's a cocktail of drugs you can take that would pretty well eliminate the virus from your system anyway, if it does exist.
Well, it doesn't exist. Just look at Magic Johnson. But these cocktails of drugs are what actually kills the people.
I know. I had a friend who stopped taking them because he felt they were more of a health problem than the actual virus.
Oh, 100%. If you really look into any of this stuff, I'm not saying everything that you hear, read is not real, but if you really look into a number of these things, including AIDS, HIV, it's a concocted scam, including the H1N1 virus, the swine flu virus, which actually paralyzed my mother from the vaccine. There's countless people that were incredibly damaged from that, and not many people even remember that now, but that was a few years ago. They concocted, this is the biggest issue in people need to pay attention to. You need to take this vaccine. That vaccine killed, I don't know how many people, and damaged countless people. And that swine flu actually that was the best flu that we've had in the last 100 years. It really didn't kill anyone.
We'll have more with the dollar vigilante, Jeff Berwick, next on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with the dollar vigilante, Jeff Berwick. Jeff, in one of your recent newsletters, you felt that the vast majority of people in the U.S. are actually what you would call welfare recipients living off the government. Can you maybe explain and give us some numbers?
Sure. I don't remember the numbers offhand, but obviously any government employee is on welfare. And then you have the military that's all right-wing welfare. And then you have people on welfare, left-wing welfare, which is tens of millions of people. And then on food stamps in the U.S., there's 50 million people. So I sort of calculated it, and it was pretty close to the entire population of the U.S. is on some sort of government welfare at this point.
I know they're trying to control costs in Canada. Our federal government is promising a balanced budget just before the election next year. What a coincidence. But in the U.S., the budget numbers, first of all, they didn't officially have a budget for several years. Has that made it hard to even know what these numbers are?
I think that we're at the point now where we have to just consider all governments our enemy. It's how many years do we need to go by where they lie, they steal, they cheat, they kill, they imprison, they kidnap, before we just stop paying attention to anything they say anymore.
If the government's employing so many people, is that the same as, say, a good company having to pay more in employee wages than it takes in revenue?
It's similar, but government is obviously a form of communism. It's central planning, and it's stolen money. So anyone who takes money from the government is taking stolen funds. So it's nothing compared to a private company.
Jeff, you had some traveling tips for people going to the United States. That was pretty interesting, and I love the way you spelt America with a K instead of a C at the end of it. Maybe tell us what those 10 tips are and why they're so important.
Well, the number one tip that hardly anyone knows, and the more that people know this, it probably won't work anymore, but I've done this about 50 times, is when you go up to the U.S. TSA and they want you to go to the microwave machine and get microwaved, you just tell them that you can't lift one of your arms above your head, and they actually just open up the metal detector machine and you just walk right through and everything's fine. But I really recommend that people just stop going to the U.S. It's really getting this bad, Jim. I hate to sound like I'm crazy, or it's really getting this bad. I would not take my family or my kids or my dogs to the U.S. at this point.
And you live outside the United States?
Yeah, I do. I live down in Mexico, which is better, but I see changes down here all the time. This rollout of some sort of one world government, I hate to sound like a crazy conspiracy theory, but I see it all the time. Down here in Acapulco, which used to be incredibly free. I just walked by the other day a place, had at least 100 SUVs full of SWAT team geared, machine gun ready police out there protecting us from plants, apparently.
Friends of mine who've visited Mexico say they haven't seen any evidence personally of this so-called rampant violence that needs to be cracked down on.
No, most of that violence that you hear about in the news, it's mostly propaganda. I consider Mexico to be the safest place in North America by far. There is some sort of things, but people don't understand what's going on in Mexico. People down here, there's no real courts or police, which is actually good, actually. And so if you have a problem, you just take care of it yourself. And so then in the news, they'll say, oh, the mayor just got killed. Well, that was just vigilante justice.
Well, if you have widespread corruption, somebody somewhere is getting ripped off, I would think.
Well, actually, if you're going to have governments, I really prefer a massively corrupt over a totally not corrupt government. Government is evil. It's just unnecessary evil. And so, yeah, if it's corrupt, then you can just pay someone off. So, for example, I'll give you an example. If you get pulled over in Mexico, which rarely ever happens, but if you do, you might have to pay someone $5 or $10. If you get pulled over in Canada, the U.S., your life is in your own hands, and your dog is probably going to get shot.
Yes, and we just saw that recent video of the woman crossing the highway in California having the crap beat out of her by an officer.
Yeah, it's out of control, and people need to sort of wake up a little bit. Stop paying attention to the mainstream media. Stop listening to the propaganda, that's what they say, and start paying attention with your own eyes to what's going on. If you pay attention, there's a lot of stuff going on that's not being reported about.
Here in Canada, we have a Senator, Mike Duffy, a former national news reporter, by the way, charged with 31 counts of fraud, attempted bribery of an official, attempts to defraud the taxpayer of $200,000. I wonder, A, why was he named as senator by the Prime Minister? Did he cover up stories that he discovered and this is his payoff? Or is he being used as a scapegoat? And if Mike Duffy is held up in the courts, will we just walk away and think all the rest of the politicians are snow pure?
Well, that's sort of my point is they're all evil and corrupt, any government official by nature. Just look at the UK with, I forget his name, that radio show host who molested hundreds or thousands
Jimmy
of kids.
Savile.
Yeah.
And Rolf Harris, who wrote me Tie Me Down Kangaroo, sport, and also did a television show here in Vancouver, I think in the late 60s, early 70s. Well, he's just been convicted and sent to jail for 4 years in Britain, and he's in his 80s. So, in other words, it's a life sentence, most likely. But that was a government cover-up.
Well, I think what they do is, for example, with Jimmy Savile, like he was good friends with the Queen, the royal family, one of the most dangerous families on earth. They once he's dead, they'll kind of put him out there, kind of say, okay, there's some bad people. But really, you have to be very circumspect about anyone involved with government.
Jeff, can you maybe tell people more about your website and about dollarvigilante.com?
Sure, it's very simple. It's just dollarvigilante.com. If you went to public education, government schools, you probably can't spell that. It's just dollarvigilante.com.
Thanks to our guests, David Skarica, Larry Reaugh, and Jeff Berwick. And thank you for listening. I'm Jim Goddard for Phil Mackesy. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.